Well, the Strategic Planning Conference is underway for the U.S. Meat Export Federation. It's underway in New Orleans, and I'm Susan Littlefield. This report is being brought to you by the Nebraska Corn Board, enhancing demand, adding value, and ensuring sustainability. I'm excited to have one of the speakers from earlier in this conference. Jim Wiesemeyer is joining us. He's a Washington policy analyst. He works for Pro Farmer and Farm Journal, but always has a great insight as to what's happening in Washington, D.C. And Jim, no surprise, everybody's wondering what's going to happen with this farm bill.
Later rather than sooner. That's why I never put a year on a farm bill, and I've covered 11 of the 19 in our history, by the way. The reasons are similar to what we've had for the last few months. Funding. They're trying to find more funding. I think eventually they will, maybe not the dollar amount that they want to really improve Title I, which is the safety net program. But now we also have a timing issue. G.T. Thompson, Republican from Pennsylvania, the House Ag Committee chairman, said yesterday that the December House consideration of the new bill is off the table. He said now it will be January at the earliest. I do like to point out that we need an extension of the 2018 Farm Bill, because while some provisions expired at the end of September, other provisions expire at the end of this calendar year. So it looks like they'll have a 1-year extension, perhaps tied into the continuing resolution, but that's still murky at this time. But the most important fact for your audience is that that doesn't rule out a new farm bill next year, but it looks like it would start with 2025 crops. Why? That gives USDA time to write the implementation language, go out for regulations, etc.
But is there concern? We're going into an election year. Does that possibly push it back another year after that?
No, not well. It could, but we've had farm bills in election years, and since the farm bill usually is bipartisan, we've had some partisanship in the last few farm bills, including this one, by the way. I think the will is there to get it done in calendar year 2024. Also, Debbie Stabenow, the Senate Ag Committee chairwoman, is not running for re-election, and she's going to want to have another farm bill under her legacy cap.
That's a good point. And I don't think a lot of folks have talked about. What do you see as some of the sticking factors, though, in this farm bill when you've got Republicans versus Democrats, city versus urban?
Yeah, well, on the Democrats, if you take $1 out of food stamps, you're in trouble, and any policy changes. So that's always an issue, and it's defeated a couple farm bills in the past where they've had to come back and revise the language and the funding. On the Republican side, especially on the Senate, the ranking member, John Bozeman, Republican from Arkansas, really wants to boost the reference prices, especially for the southern crops, cotton, peanuts, and rice, because unlike corn and soybeans, they won't get a bump up in the reference price next year. That was as a result of an adjustment factor in the 2018 Farm Bill, but that costs money. And so that's the problem, that the Farm Bill has already estimated the baseline of the Farm Bill over 10 years is $1.51 trillion. So, and in this particular environment now, the Republicans are starting to come back to their let's reduce the deficit days. They haven't been there for the last few years. So it may be a little difficult finding the amount of money. But yesterday, USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack said the word that other lawmakers have used over the last 6 months that has caught my ear: be creative in finding new revenue. That word creative jumps out at me. And he told them there are ways to be creative. Let's talk. So that was interesting.
Well, when you look at this whole farm bill and the dynamics of it and how it's changed, you said you covered 11 of them so far. It still has its roots in agriculture, even though nutrition is such a big part of it.
Yeah, although I do think, as some farmers say, they need to put the farm back in the Farm Bill. The crop insurance program, which has permanent, it's not embodied totally by the Farm Bill, thank goodness, that we don't have to worry about the funding. over my 50 years of covering the business of agriculture, the crop insurance program, and now for dairy and cattle especially, it's been the best risk management tool I've ever seen. Far better than the Title I program. So crop insurance will be protected. It has bipartisan support. So I would say watch. In fact, it could be improved in the new Farm Bill by lowering the subsidies, allowing more farmers to buy up on their insurance policies, and that would be a good thing.
Well, Jim, as you look at the workings of this upcoming farm bill and what's been discussed so far, is there kind of a dark horse, shall we say, or something in there that we might not expect that's going to pop out in this bill?
Well, you always, in the ag sector, you always worry about amendments and the amendments from both political parties. And regretfully, now in Washington, both political parties are stressing the extremes of their parties. On the Democratic side, the far left, the squad, if you will, and on the far right, about 8 of the lawmakers, led by Matt Gaetz, who I like to say the Gates from hell.
What was the reaction? I mean, you had the opportunity to talk with folks at USMEF. What has been the reaction that they've kind of the feedback they've given you, or maybe some questions and concerns that came from the floor?
Well, they need to grow. They need more market access. And so a number of them, I think, are rightfully concerned about where U.S. trade policy is going. We've moved away from traditional bilateral and multilateral agreements. It's a different philosophy that the Biden administration has. They're not going through Congress for new trade agreements, but agriculture knows that if we can lower the tariffs, U.S. products can be very competitive. So that is a legitimate concern. On the feed grain area, especially corn, it looks like Brazil, for the second consecutive year, could be the world's largest exporter. Now, that's a mega change, and there's a whole host of reasons for that. But the U.S. market has to remain competitive, and again, that dovetails into we need better market access.
Well, as we wrap up our conversation, what parting words do you have for folks who are, very patiently waiting to see where this farm bill leads?
This too shall pass. I always want to tell lawmakers, you eventually come to an agreement. Why does it take so long? Get in a room. They ought to bolt it, because they're smart people and even smarter staff, by the way,
Oh,
and
yeah.
they can come up to an agreement. And for the farmers, I would say, yeah, there'll be peaks and valleys, as they know, in the crop and livestock prices. But we're in a protein world, and agriculture is protein, not only from the crop sector, the meat sector, but now the fuel sector. There's some mega changes coming in the sustainable aviation fuel. What I just said is agriculture has a very robust outlook in the decades ahead.
Great words of advice. Thanks so much for joining us today, Jim.
Sure.
USMEF meeting does continue in New Orleans. I'm Susan Littlefield, Rural Radio Network.